Welcome to another edition of Consensus Unreality. Before we get into today's episode, we want to invite you to join us over at patreon.com/consensusunreality, where we host exclusive episodes, discussions, feedback experiments, written content, and much more.
We are planning to move over some of the kind of stuff that we'll put on the main cast on over to the Patreon. We're going to expand it a little bit, have a little bit more of everything we've been doing already, and it's sort of the best way you can support us. It's $5 a month, and if you like what we do over here in the free podcasts, you'll be seeing a lot more of that kind of stuff over on Patreon, and it's the best way to support Ben and David of Consensus Unreality. So here is another beautiful episode. Episode 50. All right, welcome to episode 50 of Consensus Unreality. Today we're joined by Allen Greenfield, occultist and ufologist, and the author of books like Secret Cipher of the UFONauts, Secret Rituals of the Men in Black, and the recently reissued Saucers and Sorcerers. And we're going to be getting into a bit of the connection between the realms of the occult and UFOs today, along with maybe some golden age ufological lore. Welcome to the show, Alan.
I'm so glad to be here. But then at my age, I'm so glad to be anywhere, you know?
It's a good way to look at things. Cool. So what's been going on with you? How's everything going? You just put out this new book, so it's a reissue of an earlier book, right?
Yes and no. I mean, it's the only the original edition was like in 1975, 76, when the stuff in there was, current.
Yeah.
And it was the only thing I've ever done, at least as books go, that was self-published. So it came from PANP Press, Pan American New Physics Press, i.e. myself.
Yeah.
And I think it maybe sold, 100 copies, mostly to friends and enemies and, frenemies.
Yeah.
And then I got invited to Fate magazine put on this once-in-a-lifetime convention in Chicago. So I'm bragging to my then wife, hey, I'm a somebody in this area. I may be a nobody here in Atlanta, but I'm a somebody in ufology. And I get there, and they put me over in a side room opposite Ray Palmer. So I had like 8 people in the audience, one of whom was Jerome Clark. Mm-hmm. And I took it out on him. I said, you know why there's nobody here other than, family members? And it's your fault, Jerry. And I said, you're not a street hippie like me. And he said, well, I used to be. I said, well, you're away from the streets too long. And it went on like that I didn't talk about the book or anything. I just harangued for an hour and a half about how unfair this was. So the room empties out, Jerry first, of course. Yeah. He wasn't feeling too good, I suppose, maybe because of, perhaps his, I just blurred out. That's scary.
Was he right behind your Illuminati handlers? They were like, this guy's okay, we got him.
No, he was probably the Illuminati handler for the convention sent him as a courtesy, So I'm feeling less than great, and so even my wife leaves the room. So I think, okay, I have totally lost any credibility here. Although at that convention, I mean, Margaret Mead was there, Kenneth Arnold was there.
Oh, wow.
People that later you really couldn't have seen. And a man walks into the room, and he said, "Can I have an autograph?" And I thought, well, he's not the first autograph I've had, but he's not more than the 10th or 15th, so I'll be glad to. So I autographed his copy of Saucers and Sorcerers, which he already had from, I don't know, stolen editions or whatever. Yeah. And he said something to me that has stuck with me through the years. He said, "This book completely changed my life." So that made the convention for me.
Yeah.
So what I did was, I don't really have any creative control over, what my publisher brings out, but I am asked, and I said, well, if you do an update and get one of the other middle ufologists, as we used to call ourselves, i.e. the teen ufologists of the 1960s, grown somewhat older, mostly living in God's waiting room. And no, that's not fair. So Rick Hilberg, who's very skeptical of current ufologists. Anyway, he wrote a new introduction for it, and I believe the publishers changed some things around, and just basically without updating the internal material. It starts off with an explanation for the phenomena, which was unpopular then and which is becoming increasingly popular now. Yeah. So I stand by it more or less. And although I think, I would articulate it better now. And the story of the people who were neither contactees nor nuts and bolts ufologists, as we just disparagingly call the idiots who think disclosure is coming any minute now. I got in ufology in 1960, and disclosure was coming any minute now. And Jesus is coming back any minute
I was thinking
now.
about that. Yeah, it sounds like that.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like that. And I even suspect, not to sound conspiratorial, but this is one that fits really well. Ray Palmer thought it was the case. The way NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, at 1536 Connecticut Avenue, Washington, D.C., official sounding thing with Major Kehoe and a board consisting of, I think the head of the board at that time was Admiral Hillencutter. It sounds like that was kind of a CIA front because it was formed by a civilian by the name of Townsend Brown, about whom I know his name. And shortly thereafter, Kehoe takes over, and the board consists of his people from his classmates at the Naval Academy, and including the first head of the CIA. Right. So it doesn't take too much imagination to say maybe that was the diversion. It's all about nuts and bolts, but they can't land. They can hover above us and they can be from other planets, but they've never landed. And anybody who says otherwise is a damn liar.
That's funny. It's so similar to today. It feels like the same kind of camps and the same, what are they, ATIP or whatever they're calling themselves now. Like it's all the same formula of like
Academy
probably
to
CIA.
the stars. The empire never ended, right?
Well, I think the empire never ended is true. But unlike a lot of the conspiracy theorists, I don't think the government has any real interest in UAP. I hate that term. Yap. It's a yap. Yap, 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 yap. Sounds like the dog across the hall. But so their interest in UFOs has always been very low key. What they are interested in are when they test some sort of stealth flying machine of whatever vintage. They want to know what kind of reactions they're getting to it. And a great cover story there is, maybe those were, yaps, unidentified aerial phenomena. But don't worry, they're not from somewhere else. They're ours, or perhaps the Russians. Well, these days the Russians have trouble getting, getting their missiles off the ground, much less anything else. So I guess it's the Chinese,
Right.
and the North Korean, the axis of evil.
Yeah, it seems like there's, I think we're probably on the same page about that. It feels like it's just a useful myth. I mean, whatever else it is for the government, I guess it's just like a way to brush something away while still being able to be semi-public about what it looks like or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, of course, there are concerns about some of the country developing a very advanced technology, which all you have to do is read a lot of headlines, which I do because I post interesting ones on Twitter on a daily basis. And China seems to be at least claiming to do really lots and lots of very, very advanced things that I haven't heard from our side of the Pacific at all. So maybe there's concern about some kind of advanced stealth aircraft there, but I'm speculating there. I have no reason to believe that that is the case. And why would they be flying over U.S. airspace, let alone Argentine airspace or, Saudi airspace or any other place outside of the considerable territory that China rules and or claims to rule. So
right.
I doubt that that's the case, but I understand that as the concern. The original concern of the CIA was you have to have been alive in the 1950s during the McCarthy era to really fully understand how plausible this sounded then to most people, really, that after the July 1952 wave over DC, where a lot of UFOs were seen, jets were scrambled, they showed up both visibly and on radar, and it was headline news. In fact, that was my first memory of UFO stuff. A guidance from my childhood was, oh, that sounds really interesting, or whatever the childhood equivalent was. Probably it was, I want an ice cream cone. But
and here you are now, I guess. Yeah.
Then 6 months later, the CIA convenes a panel, and among the things they decide to do is take a look at the private UFO organization. Flying saucer. The UFO term had not existed at that point. The flying saucer organizations, because they may be infiltrated by the communists who may use it in order to mask a Soviet invasion. That time they had no missiles, so it was, that's not from other planets. That's coming from the Soviet Union. So maybe they did infiltrate such tiny UFO organizations as existed in the early 1950s, specifically Al Bender's organization, which was maybe 10 people. I don't know. It was very small, but I think it was just part of the Red Scare of the 1950s, and it looks stupid today, and it probably was stupid even then. Let's consult Chairman Stalin on this. What can we do to fool the Americans into not stopping our bombers? Why don't we send rumors of flying saucers through the Communist Party USA, which even then, was a much diminished organization. And by the time I ran across them in the peace movement, you could always identify them because they were little old ladies who would sit in different places around the room and would say things like, let's have a march in a working class neighborhood, which to people of a younger generation, they'd, what the hell is a working class neighborhood? Who the hell are these ladies?
Yeah. That's like a big part of George Van Tassel's story as well, correct? At the meetings at Giant Rock. I know that he was actively being investigated by the FBI. It's disputed how large that investigation was, but it certainly played a role in the later part of his life. But yeah, I mean, so much to unpack here. I would love it if you could just give us a little bit of a background on how you got interested in the occult and how you sort of turned that over towards an interest in ufology, applying the Cipher.
The Cipher came much later, and
Sure.
that was a product of my second wife's second husband, a genius by the name of Tim Coutet, who worked with the group that had developed the Cipher in England strictly for occultist purposes. And when I was shown it, I went, that's another occult theory. And because Tim had developed a very, very sophisticated mainframe computer program, which he was able to transfer to the floppy disks of the time, now lost in memory, although my publisher says they can, read floppy disks from what I don't know, maybe directly, Yeah. I see in this disk.
Like a crystal, yeah. You can scry it.
You can, you can always scry it. It's just looking at a little well-named floppy disk. It's, I can see the aliens are right here in Uranus. But don't get personal with me, boy. Okay. So ignore that, people. I'm really a nice guy, despite what people tell me. And so where was I? I do digress. So what happened is probably, I will leave that to the psychology community, but I got interested in my pubescent period, 12 to 14, in a bunch of things at the same time. I had a minor UFO sighting, which I now think was two jets flying, in formation, Top Gun and all that crap. And, but they appeared circular, and I had just read an article in some little magazine of that period that gave NICAP's address. So I sent them a report, and they said, why don't you join us at $15 a year or whatever it was? And I thought, wow, all I wanted to do was do my duty and report to the official sources, and they want me to join them. Something they later regretted, by the way. But that happened the same year. I joined the Science Fiction Book Club, which gave cheap legal knockoff editions of the current science fiction books of that period. And I joined the Mystic Arts Book Society, which was universities' arm for their general policy of that period, which is if it's not nailed down by copyright and has something to do with metaphysics or the occult, we will publish it. So, all of the classics came my way. Even the first tarot deck that I read was, and one of the only two, as far as I've ever been able to divine, that existed at that time. The so-called Rider Pact. Actually, it should be called the Pamela Coleman Smith deck, because she drew it, but they tend not to credit women with that sort of thing. So that was the bonus 1 month. And anyway, so all of that was circa 1960, 61. In 1961, I was an avid reader of Ray Palmer's magazines, and one of them was Flying Saucers, formerly known as Flying Saucers from Outer Space, which, to Ray's credit, he dropped the from outer space because, like me at a much later time, that didn't really fit what was being reported. And if you were willing to take in some of the really, really weird stuff, it just didn't fit that. It fit more in with apparitions and psychic phenomena than with what was then popular. They are beings from Mars who are coming here,
right.
Which apparently they've left Mars and have moved further out into the universe. So those interests were why, I don't know, but they all arose at the same time, and to me they always seemed to be part and parcel of the same thing. Now, when I would ask NICAP about that, in the person of the late and unlamented Richard Hall, he'd always say, "Oh, no, this Shaver stuff, ignore that because it's crazy stuff, because it's well known. They don't land, and there aren't any." So I got tired of NICAP long before I left them, because they were just, if it wasn't nuts and bolts and didn't have these imaginary limitations on them, then it wasn't real. And that means they were prejudging the evidence. And by the time I was 18 or so, I traveled around the world. I'd been to a dozen different countries in different cultures. I had matured in my view of everything, including the notion that theory comes after observation, not the other way around. If you start off saying, this is the way it is, and then look for evidence of that, you will find evidence of it. The moon is made of green cheese. Yeah, well, maybe. And, but it gets hard when the astronauts bring it back from the moon. It turns into rock because of the oxidation that happens. You can always come up with a flat Earth theory.
Sure.
Oh, if you guys are flat Earthers, I deeply apologize for that.
Yeah, we accept your apology.
Yeah, not yet, but
Yeah. Give us a couple years, maybe.
And there are no birds. Birds are all, they're secret spies that float around and take pictures of us in the bathroom and all sorts of really, really, really nice stuff. None of which I believe,
No.
Right.
It's funny that you brought up Shaver. Yeah, I was going to ask you if the Shaver stuff, because if you were reading like the Palmer magazines, was that like an early influence on you, the Shaver mythos?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And through a variety of things, which led me eventually to getting to know Shaver pretty well, and Palmer.
I'm jealous. I love it. I read, like, his stuff is just so...
Well, he's dead now, so you're going to have to dig him up, as it were. But, go for it. In Arkansas, it's probably legal. If you have fans in Arkansas, I deeply apologize for that comment. But,
Huh, yeah.
But the Shaver stuff, not so much on an intellectual level, but on an emotional level, struck me immediately. Yeah. Not as necessarily as he wrote it through Palmer, because everything he wrote, when I started to correspond with him, he did need a lot of editing if you wanted other people to see it, which he claimed it was because the Diro were beaming certain rays at him that kept him from typing in a proper order, even though he meant it that way. I mean, Shaver was unquestionably a bit titched, but I think he was onto something. I don't think that there is a hollow earth, and I don't think that the Diro and Tiro and the whole ancestral myth is as he put it. But like Palmer, and with, I think, more evidence, because, I've continued to pursue it, there are portals, often in caves and caverns and even mine shafts, that appear to be consistent with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, i.e. that there are other brains, branes, membranes they constitute really alternate realities. And I think that the first time Shaver encountered that in the 1930s was he was a welder, and welding arcs are funny things to begin with if you've ever fooled around with them. And that was his first experience. And then after that, once you're in touch with, it's like repeat abductees. If you've had it happen once, chances are it's going to happen more than once. Not always, but often. So I credit his account, and it turns out there were a lot of other people that wrote to amazing stories, and the ones that Palmer edited in the late 40s that I was fortunate enough to get some copies of from Bill Starkenstein's Bookateria in Daytona Beach, Florida, which he was selling them, old editions that he had in his book stall, I think you would call it, for like, $1 or $2 or whatever. So I'm very allergic to old paper, but I put up with it to read those things. And long before, Shavertron or any of that, I thought this stuff, it sings to me in an archetypal sense. It sounds like another reality, but it sounds like another reality that is real, not imaginary. And there's a lot of reinforcement for that. People were writing Palmer, apparently thousands, if you believe his, account, saying, I had the same kind of experience. I walked into, fill in the blank cave, and I suddenly was in the inner earth, and blah, blah, and, and the Nortans and the Atlans, and the whole mythos there. But I tended to interpret that in terms of being portals to otherwhere. And from the very beginning, and never really thought that the earth was hollow, although there are intriguing moments like the alleged diary of Admiral Byrd going beyond the North Pole and still going north, which is a totally different appearance for that. So Shaver was at the time a major influence on me, but it was a guidepost in a sense, because it showed that beyond the realm of our conventional reality, all of these phenomena, plural, represent some kind of interaction or intrusion, as the case may be, from other realities into ours, sometimes very briefly. I like to cite the scene in the original Matrix where seeing the cat do the same thing twice is a signal that Smith is coming to take you away, because it's a glitch in the Matrix. And there are glitches all the time because, according to M theory, these other realities, they have not arrived at a point where they can say, well, you can go to them and they can come to you, but they will be, in my opinion. It's just a matter of working the math. And historically, physicists don't do that real quickly. Particularly something that is liable to cost them their grants. But I think it will eventually work into something that is penetrable. Just as light speed is probably not the ultimate speed that is possible. It's the ultimate speed that's possible within certain parameters. But before I, dump on Einstein, which I won't, us Jews stick together. But because it's a conspiracy. It's an international Jewish conspiracy. But don't tell anybody. Nobody knows that we're out there doing this thing. And we control the banks and most of the universe. There was a book about the OTO that said the OTO was, I think it's called Blood on the Altar by Craig Heimbichner, and it said that the OTO was the secret Illuminati organization that controlled the world, and its two great leaders are Jim Wasserman and Allen Greenfield. Well, I couldn't resist. I wrote this guy and I said, Jim Wasserman and I, although we do share an ethnic heritage, hate each other and couldn't stand to be in the same room together, much less ruling the world. And B, I know the OTO. I've been in it for 20 years at that time. I said, they couldn't lead successfully a Boy Scout march on a burlesque house. I mean, really, the 45 caliber killer and all. It's a bunch of incompetent boobs.
Right.
Excuse me. Not everybody in it is, well, everybody in it now is probably, it's left to the incompetent boobs. But anyway, Wasserman is dead now. I'm happy to say. I feel so bad about saying that. No, I don't.
Yeah, we were going to ask you about your time in the OTO, and was that what sort of led to the split with that, or why did you decide to move on from that organization?
It was a mutual decision, or basically it was, I quit. You can't quit. We fire you. No, I quit. And it was like that. But turns out when they got around to that, because it was the same year they gave me all of these awards. And they're, I still have them, not on the wall, just as a matter of file, Thank you for heading our prison ministry. Translation, nobody else wanted to do it, apparently. And the U.S. Grand Master always assigned me stuff that I think nobody else would take. I don't know whether that was intended as a compliment or not. But anyway, so yes, and another one for citing. This is the same year they decide they don't want me no more. This is after I've quit all of my offices. So, which they conveniently forgot, and I had to remind them of and point out the dates on emails and things. I said, in the spirit of, you can't fire me. I quit. I quit a year ago. Right. I'm done with you. I'm real done with you. I'm real done with you. And there were certain moments that were part of my being done with it. I mean, the ritual stuff and the general ideas, although just like NICAP, they're restricted to within certain spaces because this is a religious organization as it now describes itself. When I got in it, it was a philosophical organization because I really didn't need another goddamn religion. We have plenty of those. And, if you want something a little on the weird side, you've got Scientology and the Hare Krishnas. And hey, if you guys are Scientologists and or Hare Krishnas, I'm deeply sympathetic to your plight in life.
I'm shutting down my Thetan reader right now, but
just hold on to those soup cans and hope for the return of Elron, which is another interesting OTO story of sorts.
Oh yes, right.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of modeled on the OTO.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
And according to his son, it was quite deliberately that. He said, Scientology is just our moneymaker, but you get into the Thelemic magic and the inner secrets of how to control people, which is, I'm sure the OTO would be delighted if they could control people, but I mean, there's, the rituals they pick you up. They pick your pocket, there is a charge for each one. And they are off Masonic rituals until you get to the 7th degree. And then it changes because there weren't any rituals associated with it except at the very end of my period involved. And again, it was 20 years. So you saw a lot of changes under Big Bill, the college dropout. But it's okay. It sounds so condescending. But Bill is one of those people who, while it may not be literally true, it fits him. He's one of those guys who did way too much acid in the 60s.
Yeah.
Where everything makes a certain kind of sense. Anyway, so I had a couple of occasions that were like, I won't say I wasn't into it for the first 10 years, but then they made me a sheriff, i.e. a sovereign grand inspector general, which happened to coincide with my getting from a friend who was in Delta Security. This is right after 9/11. So Delta Security was suddenly beefed up a lot. And so she gave me a standby fly card, which allowed me to hang around any flight that was underbooked, I guess you would say, or overbooked and somebody didn't show up or whatever. And then I flew free anywhere I wanted to. So it was just a question of, if I had patience. So I was a traveling inspector general, and everything I saw about local OTO bodies convinced me, first of all, that there was no correlation whatsoever between one's degree of initiation in the formal system of the OTO and how advanced spiritually or metaphysically or whatever you want to call it, magically, a person was. There were people who, came in off the street who were very advanced, and there were people who were at the highest level of the organization who didn't know Scheisswasser, we'll say. Didn't know much. And therefore, that was suspect number one. Suspicion number two was a conversation I had with King Dave, the American Grandmaster, where I and some other SGIGs felt like we were being mysteriously held back from the Supreme Grand Council, I think it's called. This is an organization at that time at its peak of like 3,000 members worldwide. So this was, a tiny knot of people. If it's organization for world change, it's
right.
It's a lot smaller now, and I suspect that was maybe my computer just. It must be an earthquake. Actually, we had an earthquake here in Georgia, but nobody felt it. Or at least I didn't, And
at that time, did you run into any of like the Kenneth Grant affiliated lodges, like the New ISIS or the stuff that was going on in the States? I believe.
Oh yeah, I have come to feel that while the authoritarian structure inhibits any kind of real learning, that Grant was on the right track with his ideas, largely influenced by Michael Berdio, all along. And if anybody is even remotely the rightful, heir to the OTO, whatever that may mean, since I don't think anybody is, it's like the Golden Dawn, there are disruptions at various points that I find suspect. I mean, it's just fine if people, want to revive something, but it's dishonest to say we are the uninterrupted original of the 15th century. I mean, that's Masonic crap. Yeah. And it isn't the case. There are disruptions and there are recreations, and certainly the OTO is among them. However, Grant, although he had the habit of throwing people out of his organization if they diverted at all, which that's part of the authoritarianism of the system that I don't like. His ideas, as conveyed in his books, and people who were, well, you would say at one time were part of his organization, had been kicked out but continued to work in the same general direction, like the Cincinnati Journal of Ceremonial Magic people. And right. There was a group from upstate New York. I don't know what's happened to them, but Bill Siebert was the sort of master of ceremonies in that group. They were on the right track, and they accomplished a great deal more than the OTO Inc. Has ever accomplished, because they say we have one central secret. Well, it's not a secret, and it is indeed one, and there are many. So if anyone wants to know those secrets for whatever they're charging now, my best-selling book at the moment, are you ready for the plug, is The Grail Within, a frank and personal account of sexual magic and who I did. No. Actually, it is. If you read between the lines, I had somebody who read it I said, well, I changed all the names. I said, well, if you knew the people, you can sort of, figure out who they were. And I said, whoopsie daisy. Okay. But, it's selling like hotcakes, Originally, right. I thought it should be only for initiates. So I had printed through, was it Luxor Press? I guess it was Luxor Press, 93 signed and numbered copies that I handed out free of charge to what I regarded as 93 high initiates. I guess if you count my mother's copy, that may be. But what she made of it, I wouldn't even. She'd just say, "Oh, Alan, you're always doing this sort of stuff."
That's pretty funny. Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned the Cincinnati Journal, the Bait Cabal, and Nima and them. I kind of see a little bit of a similarity in terms of and correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, in terms of the secret cipher and what they were doing in terms of like superimposition onto the landscape and stuff, with some of the workings that they were performing. I see a similar thing with the use of the cipher, applying the cipher, and making connections, creating language or letting language arise where it might not have been seen previously. And it got me thinking about like retrocausality, manifestation. And I was wondering if you found that applying the cipher is a means of decoding, or if it's more of a means of conjuration or like superimposition, if that makes any sense.
That's very close to the most important question I have about it, which I frame in the following way. Is the cipher meant to be decoded as it is in the complete secret cipher, the UFOnauts? Because you can buy, Secret Cipher, the UFOnauts, and Secret Rituals of the Men in Black separately. And I think it costs more than just to buy the complete Secret Cipher, which is both books. And there are rumors of a third book being prepared. Yeah. But I'm not supposed to talk about that. So I'm not talking about the rumored third copy, which talks about the Black Lodges and all of that stuff. Shh, don't tell anybody. This is just for you and the 40 million people that no doubt are in. Yeah. Well, you can always hope. You never know what's going to spin out of control. I certainly hope so. So the other possibility is, just as things like the Fibonacci sequence seem to be encoded into the nature of the universe or the nature of reality, depending on how you look at it, the cipher may decipher because it's an inherent way of decoding what the universe is all about. In other words, it becomes more like Kabbalah and less like a code. But I think, if the answers that you come up with are useful and meaningful and provide objective evidence of something paranormal, then which theory you're operating under probably is less important than using the cipher. The history of it is that the people who were doing the British Journal of Ceremonial Magic, Jim Lees and Carol Smith and Jake Straighton Kent, who there's a rumor that Jake is the grand poobah of the British OTO now, which I hope for his sake isn't true, but because he's a good guy and I can't imagine his accepting that, but who knows? Power corrupts and absolute power, blah, 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 blah. Lord Acton, whoever he may have been. Jim Lees went on a magical retreat. The exact nature of that, I don't know. But Crowley's famous John St. John retreat probably was very similar. And he discovered the cipher embedded in Liber Alva Legis, the Book of the Law, which I don't consider to be more significant than other sacred texts from the same period, like Al-Hasbi and the Urantia book, and I hesitate to mention it, but the Book of Mormon. There were a lot of holy books just falling from the universe at that time. And he came up with a cipher, and it worked on questions that they had about what this thelemic thing was all about. And that migrated to my late friend with the name which foreshadowed much of the 21st century, William Wallace Webb, W.W. Webb, the head of the Order QBLH, which there really wasn't any structure to. There was never very much of a membership. They put out a journal in upstate New York that was put out by Tim Cote, among others, called Thelema, until OTO Inc. said, you can't use that term. That term is a trademark of the real OTO Incorporated. So, but he moved to Atlanta, and my second wife was available, so he married her, and he turned out to be a better friend than she was. But he turned me on to this thing, and I thought, well, another occult code. There's so many hidden codes going back to at least the Kabbalistic stuff, and most prominently in magical circles at that time was the Enochian stuff. I mean, that's a code in and of itself, and it's apparently a true language. So whether that makes it authentic or not is, it works for magical workings. That's all I can say about that. Anyway, so when I was given a copy of Lexicon, which was the program that I mentioned, developed, by the way, by night by Tim, I believe he was working for the Ford Motor Company in upstate New York, and it was developed on their mainframe computers, and for all I know is still running there somewhere in the deep space, and without any knowledge of Henry Ford the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, kind of an Edsel type thing. That was a car. Right. Back when I was young and dreams were new. So I don't even remember exactly why. Maybe the secret chiefs whispered in my ear, Alan, try it on some of the these stupid names that show up in contactee cases. And I said, why are you whispering? Nobody else can hear you. This is, the secret chiefs. So I tried it on Orthon, who was this blonde, blue-eyed, tall alien who sort of resembled the Aryan myths that came out of, according to my late friend Jim Mosley, Adamski was a notorious anti-Semite.
Right.
His primary witness was, help me here. He was once important. He went by brother something or other.
George Hunt Williamson.
Yes.
Yeah.
Williamson came out of the I Am movement, and that came out of William Dudley Pelley's Silver Shirt movement. So these guys were into blonde, blue-eyed, superior beings. But to my surprise, Orthon immediately yielded the same value as Jesus. And at that time, less so now, but at that time, your standard image in America anyway, and probably in Euro-American civilization of Jesus was this blonde, blue-eyed, Aryan, benevolent-looking guy who very much resembled the descriptions of Orthon. And who would have guessed that that's, they had the same cipher value. So I tried it on a bunch of others and it made perfect sense. And then I started to try it on dates. By then I thought, there's a book in this somewhere. And from there we go to the whole story of how I got around to writing the original secret cipher, the UFOnauts, and how the sainted memory of Ron Bonds gave me my first break as an author by publishing it from the late and totally lamented Illuminat Press.
Yeah.
I think Ron paid for it with his life. Yeah, that's it sold well back in the day. I mean, it was sold out, and Ron bought the successor volume, but I eventually got around to suppressing that because I got a strong lecture in a closed-in car overlooking a cliff from Bill, the ultimate head of the Otto. And that was basically, you shouldn't be writing books on UFOs. It costs you a Grand Lodge position. I'm trying to think.
I was going to ask you about that. If there was like a tension for, because I guess it seems so obvious to have an interest in both things, but I guess within like the halls of the lodges, it was not as smiled upon to have like a UFO interest.
Oh, not only that, it was frowned upon vigorously. I mean, this is talking to the guy who is, the CEO of the corporation and the grand poobah of the OTO. Supposedly, if you buy that is the OTO. Federal courts say so, as if they can rule on what is the real Catholic Church, as opposed to, I mean, it's just something they should have dismissed out of hand, as something that is not, it gets into the way of the church-state separation that we were supposed to have up until very recently, when the court mysteriously changed into, well, I'm not going to go into Trumpian politics because that hits too many people in their lower anatomy, which is not my intent. They buy books too. And in any case, by the time I had a fairly good list, I was convinced that the cipher, it works for occult stuff, but it works for UFO stuff, and it has a predictive quality. And if you have an idealized case like an object lands, a being gets out who introduces itself as blah, 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 and tells you whatever message there is, and it becomes headline news, at least in local papers, and news everywhere, and certainly news throughout the then relatively small ufology community. Chances are it will predict where the next landing will take place. So I tried it on a couple of cases, and it worked dandy. And then I started to get requests from a couple of your fellow podcasters. Well, prove it by doing it. I said, the book is supposed to convince people to try this themselves. And if they get no results, let us know about that. Because I won't conceal something that is contrary to the theoretical structure that I have. I mean, I'm not wedded to any theories. Theories come last, facts come first. And there's a kind of a sliding scale there with stuff that nobody really is expert in. Who are the experts in ufology? Is it geologists or cosmologists or psychologists, or where do you draw the line? Because it depends on who you are. So it winds up that a bunch of enthusiastic amateurs are the closest thing to experts that you have, especially the ones who, are not dogmatic about much of anything. And thus you get hellier,
Sure.
Yeah.
The people who start off with very, very low, a low level of opinion and a high level of curiosity. Something you won't find on the History Channel.
Right.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were definitely going to ask you about, what that experience was like, kind of being, I mean, to a certain extent, it felt like it must have felt kind of strange to have like this book that you published a while back sort of come up in this like very separate investigation, right?
I was surprised that, anybody new was reading it. When it first came out, as I said, the Illuminat Press edition did quite well. And then I expected, whether it, fell my way in any royalties or anything or not, that people would start working with it. And my major concern was that if people started working with the Cipher and were able to predict cryptozoological or UFO events, that the Cipher would change. Because I have some reason to believe that between the Enochian cipher and certain Masonic ciphers and the cipher from Liberal, there have been a number of changes by whoever or whatever generates the cipher, because they don't want others, filming the landing or whatever. I mean, or shooting them down or whatever these stories about people having bounties on Bigfoot is one of the most ghoulish and conceivably homicidal things I have heard.
Yeah, it's like killing the Easter Bunny or something like that.
No, it's like killing another human being, which happens a lot. Yeah. But still is not justified and is considered by most to be a homicide. So there are any number of people who said, I had it in my sights, but it looked so human I couldn't shoot it.
Right.
But for every one of those, there's somebody out there with an AK brought back from Vietnam or something that just, I need the bounty, and it's not, if it's human, it's subhuman. Okay. Bring it home. Okay. Of course, that's assuming that these are physical beings, and I don't assume that at all. They vanish in front of people's eyes. And I think it's part of the same thing as UFOs that vanish and gray aliens that vanish. It's the same stuff. To get back to that question about, is there resistance between, let's say, occultists and ufologists? On both sides, there is enormous resistance. Less so now than, let's say, even 10 years ago. But still, there's a lot of hostility to the other ones. What Big Bill told me was, well, you see, and he said this with a straight face while a jam session he was doing with the band Psychic TV, if you've ever heard of them.
Of course,
He's saying, well, the occult is respectable in academic circles, and we're seeking that respectability, but UFOs aren't. Well, he was the boss, so what was I going to do?
Yeah.
You just spread your cheeks and you hope for the best. So I said, oh, well, I wrote a sequel. He said, is it been published? I said, no. And I chickened at that point because I was still invested in the OTO. So it was 10 years between the two editions. I was still in the OTO when it was published, but by then I didn't give a damn, I decided they don't know anything. So, if they want to kick me out, there's a very, very, very long footnote in the second part of Complete Secret Cipher. In other words, the part of the Rituals of the Men in Black. And that footnote is aimed entirely at the leadership of the OTO. It never says that exactly, but it argues essentially you're cutting yourself off from your own roots. And I go on at some length about the whole Aleister Crowley canon, which even then I was not, I didn't buy into his holy writ. I don't think that's the appropriate response to it, but they do. And if you consider that, well, it starts out with a praeter-human being dictating this holy book to Aleister Crowley, who dutifully writes it down and eventually realizes that it's important and publishes it and praises it and makes it the centerpiece of his work. And then he has contact with this being called Lamb, who's remarkably like the gray aliens of more recent times. I mean, you go through the whole thing. The Thelemic canon is dependent on some sort of interpretation of UFO lore, among other things.
Right.
And if you cut that off, you're entirely missing your own point. You're hoist on your own petard, a term I've never actually known what it means, but it sounds correct in this context.
Yeah. No, that's fascinating stuff, and that's an excellent way to put it too. That original connection. I mean, it's interesting too because Charles Fort was writing about all of these strange connections, and there's a separation that happens somewhere where this is nuts and bolts, and these guys are looking for Bigfoot, and these guys are looking for the Loch Ness Monster. But I feel like your work has been crucial in bridging that gap, and kind of maybe in terms of like, do you still use the application of the term ultra-terrestrials? Do you still subscribe to that in the John Keel sense?
Well, not necessarily in the John Keel sense, because I'm not sure that John, throughout his fairly long career, had exactly the same interpretation that he had, early on when he wrote Operation Trojan Horse, which actually was a much longer book, and his publisher said, it's already long. So the next couple of books, Strange Creatures from Time and Space, and I don't remember which three came first, but, he had a long career, and I don't think he stayed on the same page, to his general credit. But I think ultra-terrestrial applies if you assume that what you are seeing or what people are reporting is what is actually the source of that particular stimulus, the phenomena. I think that, and this is another one of my little sermons that I try to hold for conventions, which I don't get invited to very much, although I do have a policy of if half the audience doesn't leave, I feel like I've failed at my task. But where was I? Senior moment, help me here.
Yeah, we're talking about Keel's Keel's ultra terrestrials. I feel like he hones in on something very specific in the Eighth Tower.
That's a pretty late book,
right? Like his fifth unified field theory, sort of. But, yeah, I feel like he's kind of getting at that. There's, different languages. There's a different superimposition for one thing that is interpreted by many people. And I'm just curious, like, if there's still a trickster element involved in that, and maybe if the trickster element is a means to peel back the layers of reality. Obviously there's the consideration towards malevolence, or super consciousness, kind of rambling a bit, but yeah, it's kind of like interesting to interrogate maybe the intention of the phenomena in this whole
where
thing.
I was headed, and this may speak to the trickster element, because I consider that neutral, and classically tricksters are not necessarily good or evil. Right. They are somewhere in the middle, and my argument is you cannot be a magus without also being a mountebank, which is a con man, a juggler, somebody who seemingly defies reality through talent, a magician, someone who creates illusions but also creates realities out of non-realities, and then the magus, who is beyond that, which are the four permutations of the tarot card, the magus. But where I sort of was headed with that was, keep in mind that from a biological perspective, human beings just came down out of the trees and stood upright 10 minutes ago. I mean, in terms of the period of time that there has been organic life on the earth, insofar as we know. And from a geological standpoint, it's 30 seconds ago. And from a cosmological standpoint, it's a fraction of a second. The notion that the senses that we developed when we stood upright, stereo vision, stereo hearing, the five senses that are generally acknowledged, are they equipped to do anything beyond to eat and not get eaten, to reproduce without getting eaten in the act, like the black widow spider, and similar functions? In other words, the basic things that for most of the existence of Homo sapiens, that's all we did. There's no indication that we were, speculating beyond the most primary functions. And then along came agriculture and civilization, but still we are those basic five senses, with perhaps an intuitive sense that is not universally credited yet. But is that sufficient to resolve something that is truly not from this universe? And my tentative answer is no. So what do we see? If there's a stimulus, but not something that we can resolve, what does the human brain do with it? And there's all kinds of research on that for other reasons altogether, that we resolve it in the best way that we can. whether it's, Bigfoot or gray alien or it's a wisp or it's a ghost or whatever, could all be the same thing. You get that a bit from the Whitley Strieber account, the masks. But I don't think the final mask is even something that's intentional. Maybe, but probably is the limitation of our consciousness to resolve whatever it is the stimulus is. And the stimuli are, maybe would be better. And so I tend to take these cases in somewhat symbolic terms, although I think they do have a real source in reality. Just as when you look at stars, you're not really, in most cases, you're not seeing the star. You're getting a stimulus from the fact that stars are great energy sources, but without the help of the telescopes, and the human eye is not really built to resolve it more than just a twinkling point of light. So I think the same thing applies, and therefore, I listen to the cases and the trickster element when it comes in, like in the Joe Simonton case and he prepared them buckwheat pancakes. I don't dismiss the case. I think it's the situation where people cope with these things as best they can. And it's needs to be seen in those terms. And the photos and the pictures that have shown up, they basically, they're designed to be within the spectrum of things that we can see, because what would be the point of I used to use this little joke where in one of my fanzines that I got out, it would show a blank page, white page, and it would say at the bottom, white Dero in a snowstorm. And then you turn the page and there was nothing but black ink on the page. And at the bottom, it would say black Dero at midnight. And some people didn't get it, but it was making an important point, I think.
Yeah. Do you think so it's possible that all of these sorts of different shifting paranormal, for lack of a better term, encounters or sightings are somehow projections of the same source, kind of projected through our ability to see it in a way?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I'm not sure that it's the same source, but I would assume that it's the same sources.
Right.
That is, it may be more than one entity or form or whatever, and some of them are unintentional. I think a lot of ghost cases, for example, they seem to be operating on a different plane of existence, but sometimes in multi-witness cases they notice the witnesses and then they disappear. What the hell is that? They see the ghost and we're the ghosts, I guess. So I think there are the deliberate encounters. And then I think probably much, much more common, there are glitches in the matrix on a daily basis everywhere. And some of them we just filter out because we do have to continue to eat and not get eaten, and hopefully to reproduce and not get eaten when we're doing that. So your basic human functionality has to continue if the human race is to continue. But I think the best description was in a late 19th century book about geometry, the Edwin Abbott's, which is public domain, by the way, description of flatland.
Yeah.
It's something that everyone who is interested in these phenomena should read, because basically towards the end of it, he's talking about the possibility that maybe there are other dimensions beyond flatland and sphere land, and and I think probably there are an infinite number, is my best guess.
Have you, throughout your life, as you were beginning to get more into like practical and ceremonial magic, did you notice any related increase in experiences in, if you have had any like experiences in the UFO or paranormal, like, have you is there any kind of like balance between those things, I guess I'm asking?
Well, there are things in magical ritual that are designed to take you to otherwhere, for lack of a Magonia, whatever you want to call it, fairyland, and or bring something from otherwhere here. And the best results I've gotten with that are working the Enochian ethers, never alone. I've always done it with lots of witnesses present, but you can get real world, so, quote unquote, results from that are certainly paranormal. And in that sense, yes, but in the sense of, do I attract more paranormal phenomena or UFO? I don't think I've ever seen a genuine UFO. I've thought I had, but if everyone is subject to suggestion, and if you're in an area that is doing field research and it's really, really hot for UFO stuff, Brooksville, Florida comes to mind during John Reeves' heyday, because practically everybody in the town was, having fairly close encounters. He was the only one that was a contactee, I guess you would call him, or an abductee, or what do you call a voluntary abductee? Victim of Stockholm syndrome? I don't know. But I saw something, and I had a camera in my hand, and I was with Ron Reitner and the late Joan Reitner, who were the local, they were from St. Pete, and they were the local people that knew all of the witnesses in that area. And what I did was I saw this thing rising up from the ground and clearly not being an aircraft or something. And my response was, "Oh my God, look at that. Oh my God, look at that." But it turned out it was a launch from Cape Canaveral across the state. And when it reached a certain altitude, it had a stage separation, which is what I was seeing. But it just shows, Allen, at that point, 15 years, an investigator, calm, cool, and collected. I didn't even touch my camera. I went, "Oh my God, look at that. I mean, look at that." And Ron is taking pictures. I said, "Look at that." Because that sense of wonder can override just about anything.
Sure.
But no, the closest I can claim is that when I do something that is related to any of the paranormality, for lack of a universal term, which I hope develops, I will have a bunch of synchronicities happen.
Right.
Not necessarily related to it, but, it's nevertheless coincides too closely to be called coincidence, which I kind of doubt the whole concept of coincidence, but I do think synchronicity is far more common than most people think. Mm-hmm. And when I get close to, they used to call it fairy glamour, which is, the fairies throw their pixie dust mm-hmm. and stuff happens. And when I'm close enough to get that pixie dust, what happens to me, and I'm not the only one, I mean, there are a lot of people that report this same thing, is they get a bunch of synchronicities mm. and they trail off at some point. But yeah, that I get. Yeah. But in terms of, a UFO hovering outside my window, let me look. No, there's nothing out there except the garden. And the gardener, he's gray and I'm lying.
Yeah. Cosmic gardener.
I think we've both experienced that for sure. The you get on a certain trail and then the synchronicities just start popping up everywhere.
The advice I gave the Hellier people obtains with anybody that does field research, which I urge every able-bodied person willing to take a few risks to do, is to follow the synchronicities. Because if you do, your initial goal may change, but you're headed in the direction of some kind of really important what's it. And the closer you follow the synchronicities, the more likely it is that you're going to have some really important experiences, assuming you don't get lost in a cave somewhere and get eaten by a deero or a bear, which is more likely, actually.
Yeah, that's an interesting direction. It makes me think of in Grant's books, he writes about the concept of tangential tantrum, which is maybe like undesired or unexpected effects or symptoms of magical workings. And it harkens back to the idea of window areas too, and maybe it's obvious, but is there a connection between ceremonial magic and the concept of window areas?
Well, ceremonial magic has a number of techniques for creating temporary windows. And in fact, people who are really not well prepared magically shouldn't be doing it at all, because one of the most important things, like on the rare occasions when I teach something about magic, I teach people to do exorcisms and banishings before I teach them anything about doing any kind of positive magic, because it's a lot easier to open gates than to close them. And I think our great example of an unclosed gate was Jack Parsons and L. Ron, going out in the desert and doing this thing and then leaving. And of course, they had effects. Some of them sort of thing that you'll find in the back of The Grail Within, plug number 2. But actually, I think people, if they want to start, they should read Complete Secret Cipher and then read Saucers and Sorcerers and see what madmen we were when we were young and foolish. But resisting the nuts and bolts people on the one side and the gaga contactee types on the other. It was a tough ride for a long time. But you need to know how to do that. In terms of it being connected, I think that magic is a technology of the sacred, to borrow a term from one of the Bertillot-generated organization. In other words, it's a way of opening and closing portals to one or another of the, I hate to call them alternative universes, because the term universe may not even apply to it, because one thing that is almost certainly true is the laws of physics, as we understand them, do not apply necessarily. I mean, I would imagine if there are, as I suspect, an infinite number of alternatives, that some of them resemble Earth to an eerie extent. I mean, duplicates of yourself, things like that. And there's even some thought that, when you die here, you go there and become, hopefully a younger and healthier version of yourself. But that's speculative and not something that I necessarily think is the case. But you will, if they're an infinite number, by definition, if you can think of it, it's there somewhere. And how much of this, transposes into our reality and how much of it doesn't, that's an open question that I don't have an answer for. They could all be from one alternate reality that is vaguely similar to our own, or they could be from an infinite number. Or, one of the criticisms of ufology is, why don't they all look alike and, sound alike and say the same things? They all come from the planet area, or, something else. Or they're all saying, we're from the dark side of the moon, which is now apparently a Chinese property, which they're, selling real estate on. But we don't know. We do know that they vary a lot, but they do have elements in common that indicate that they interact with our reality in relatively fixed ways. And we respond to those fixed ways in ways that have something to do with the way we process reality, which, that's about as far as we can go on that. But in terms of, using ceremonial magic as a means of opening a portal and going through it, first, you need to have very good survival skills. And second, you need to spend, 10 to 20 years learning ceremonial magic, including how to get out of a difficult situation. And if you don't know that, don't try this at home.
Fair warning.
Yeah, I try to give that warning because people will dive in and, I don't know, the enthusiasm is good, but, I always say, you were doing that and you didn't have an Orgon energy accumulator in your pocket. You were investigating this cult and you really didn't have a pistol in your pocket, because they were probably not glad to see you.
Sure.
I mean, there are practical considerations. You need to know what you're doing, and then you need to document it and share it. And I would, I fondly hope there will be lots and lots of people that'll be doing that. And, I hate to keep mentioning, I don't hate to keep mentioning, just Hellier was the first I had seen that with professional production values and a sincerity that I wish I had seen all along in ufology, just going with the flow and following the synchronicities and not having some one big experience where the UFO lands and takes them inside and teaches them the alphabet and whatever the particulars are. And that's a pretty good model for where to go. I would add, when you go into a mine shaft, please wear a helmet and please leave somebody outside in case of a cave-in. Also, don't worry so much about Pan. Worry about bears. Bears that might be hibernating, or they might have cubs, and they might not take too well to people saying, "Yo, Pan!"
Yeah,
they deserve an Emmy for that, actually. And
absolutely.
That may be coming. But I hope there are others who, take that to the next level and the next level and the next level. And you need people who are young enough to do this sort of thing, and also who have enough background experience that they don't wind up becoming one of the thousands of people that disappear without a trace every single year.
Right.
Yeah, echoing that, did you have any explicit thoughts about chaos magic when that thing first started happening?
When what started happening?
I guess the early books on chaos magic and kind of like a more experimental nature to magical practices.
Well, I think what I was saying about the implicits in the universe, I think that comes out of chaos theory, which is an orthodox scientific theory, not necessarily universally accepted, but it's, had its a trend during the period of the hippies who saved physics, which is the name of a book that I highly recommend. But these are very old hippies now, but back in the 1960s, where physics had sort of reached the standard model and nothing goes beyond it, they changed everything. And a lot of these guys are still around, but I don't see a new generation of physicists taking it to a level beyond that. Chaos magic, while it has some of the same burdens as other schools of magic, which is a lot of ego boo and, personality cults and things of that sort, I think it's on the right track, which is if you follow the path of, I guess you would call it following the synchronicities, the magic works. And if you don't, the magic doesn't work. And I know that's oversimplifying what they've had to say. Maybe it needs a little oversimplification, but yeah, I've got no quarrel with chaos magic. I do have some reservations about some of the personality cults that develop in that direction.
Sure.
The only personality cult I recognize is sitting in this chair, and I do have the answers, but most of them I won't tell you now because it would drive you mad.
Have you applied the Cipher to any of the newer news in ufology? Tom DeLonge registering Christ-like comparisons?
Well, I don't know if that's a perfect comparison. I'll wait until he rises from the dead. But I mean, I've got no complaint about him. He seems to be a conventional ufologist who is famous in another area. And the only other person I know of in that respect is William Gary Keith Breeze. So I don't know. I mean, what he's preaching is not what I'm preaching, but I have, people who have relatively conventional views of the phenomena. I'm okay with them doing that, but I'm not okay with them saying, oh, but don't get into the really weird stuff. So DeLonge is fine,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a very generous take on it, I think, which is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like that's really driving the popular discourse about UFOs right now, is that sort of pushing for disclosure.
Yeah, well, that is a problem because it's a diversion. Again, if that was what NICAP in its heyday was all about, the government knows, and it's our job to get them to reveal the truth. Kehoe's books. Now dust, more or less, but like Kehoe himself. But basically, flying saucers, top secret. I think that was his bestseller. Flying saucers from outer space.
Right.
That kind of approach, and that's all that really NICAP did. It recorded cases, and it had a really big caseload that was, I think they published, and that was more Richard Hall's doing, I think. I think it was called the UFO Evidence. I don't remember. Yeah. A little boring, but nevertheless, it was a catalog of cases. And MUFON, which is not my favorite organization, nevertheless, although there are people in it that I have great respect for, nevertheless, they do publish an online catalog of cases. So that's good. Even LITs, lights in the sky cases. It's important because we don't know what is and is not important.
Right.
Sure, yeah. Huh, that's a good point. Maybe this is sort of this is sort of a left field question, but are you familiar with the work of Eugenia Macer-Story?
No, but I'll fake it if you want me to.
No. Darn, I thought we were going to get into some kind of... Yeah, I feel like she was traveling in sort of the same circles as you, another sort of occultist / ufologist.
I'm hoping there will be more and more of those,
Yeah. It seems like
we have no center whatsoever. And some of that's by design. I mean, I am an advocate of free illuminism, which is you don't have a boss. You don't have bosses. You don't have dogma, and you don't charge for what you do. And there are groups all over the world that subscribe to that notion, but I don't necessarily know everybody that's involved.
Sure.
And because the design is sort of modeled on God Emperor of Dune, Golden Path, which is disperse humanity so that we survive somewhere. I'm delighted that there are people and organizations that I've never heard of. It means it isn't centered on me or on my ideas or anybody else's, and never will be, because it's out there in the realm. I only hope people share what they come up with, and that there are people who become archivists and correlators who can figure out what this is about, for which I rely on you podcasters, all of you, to put out there and see where it goes. I suspect that will be what the next generation of the phenomena is, unless, of course, it's all on the History Channel.
Yeah.
I always say when they ran out of stock footage of World War II, suddenly they're interested in ghosts, and UFOs, and paranormal stuff, and these expert plumbers who go into a house, and if they hear a rat in the wall, they go, let's do our EM thing with that. There are electromagnetic effects. Clearly, a ghost inhabits this house.
Maybe they daylight as exterminators, killing two birds with one stone.
No, they really are plumbers, actually.
That's great.
Do you think there's any bounds on the use of the cipher in terms of what it's applied to? I know that in your book, there's a really great section on the application to some of the works of Philip K. Dick, and they're not exactly fiction. But do you think there's anything to be gained from experimenting with the cipher with works of fiction?
Oh, yeah, sure. Because I'm not sure there...
Right.
I'm not sure there is a sharp line between fiction and nonfiction. Okay. So if that puts me in the doghouse of the crazy people, then I'm in the doghouse of the crazy people. But I know a lot of science fiction writers, and most of them are anti-mystical. I mean, everybody has their own turf in this stuff. It's like bad neighborhoods in LA, I mean, it's just, it's a turf war. But Phil Dick was, who I never met, unfortunately. He didn't do a lot of traveling, and so we never had the opportunity. Anyway, most of the science fiction writers I've met, can I say asshole on your program?
Sure.
Yes, are assholes, or they were. And I got into an argument with Ursula Le Guin. I love her works, but I thought she was totally off base about Philip K. Dick. She was, he's sexist. I said, he's been married 5 times. I think he probably has a somewhat negative take on relations between the sexes for really good reasons, because everything he writes is quasi-autobiographical. And she said, well, they made up, but I never heard from Ursula again.
Now there is that kind of I've noticed that in science fiction writers, and it's interesting. We did an interview with a horror writer, Nicole Cushing, who was until recently very not interested in any of the paranormal, had no stake in it, but wrote these very weird fiction kind of paranormal things until she had this crazy series of synchronicities around Mothman, and is now like extremely interested in like the Shaver mythos and Mothman and that whole kind of like hub. And so it was actually a really interesting conversation to talk to someone who very recently kind of left this kind of counterintuitive, to me at least, like orthodoxy within genre fiction, where they kind
of you have Whitley Strieber. I mean, up until Communion, he was a horror fiction writer.
Yeah. Right.
So it's not totally new, but one would hope people would. Yeah. There are no. I better not say no. I don't know of any great writers who happen to be interested in this whole panoply of strangeness. There are fair to middling good writers, but not somebody that you would expect to make the New York Times bestseller list. And the last person to do that was Frank Edwards in the 1960s. And he wrote the, pop culture version of UFO stuff. So right. I knew him, and he would tell racist jokes in his hotel room. And also unkind comments about one of the coaches on the Atlanta Braves. I guess that was to put him in with a group of Southerners who happened to be not part of the Old South Gestalt. So he would, he was not the person, but he was a first line writer. And then you have other people like Keel who were first line writers, but not in strange phenomena, but in, as I pointed out, men's magazines of that period of the early 60s, like Saga and True and Argosy, the ones I always cite because they're the ones I read when I was a teenager and thought that's so sophisticated. I found the Island of Lost Women. That's my favorite short story there. But of course, you go back in time, you have Howard Phillips Lovecraft and his occasional collaborators, and certainly his circle of people, which included Robert E. Howard and most interestingly, E. Hoffman Price, who co-wrote with Lovecraft the second part of Through the Gates of the Silver Key, which what it was talking about in fictionalized form was exactly what I'm talking about in the M theory type of multiverse.
Yeah.
And I have some reason to believe that Price, who lived a very long life and made the rounds in Southern science fiction fandom, had a pretty good knowledge of the occult. So while Lovecraft was strictly a materialist, so he said, unless it was sort of like Stephen King's wife and he dreams these things and writes them down. He was definitely a first-line writer, although didn't get any first-line attention in his lifetime.
Yeah.
By the way, not to plug someone in my family, but my son, Alex Greenfield, look him up on IMDb, makes movies that are occult-themed, and I hear that his thus far magnum opus, which is called Lullaby, comes out this year, which means sometime in the next 6 months.
That's
hopefully
awesome.
Around Halloween, because it's well, I can't talk about the script, but it's really it's an occult-themed movie that has as much authenticity in the occult stuff. After all, he was raised
right
in the occult, as A Dark Song, which comes fairly close to what the Abramelin ritual is really like. It's condensed and has a couple of gratuitous scenes, but other than that, it's knowledgeable.
Yeah.
So
that's great to hear. We need more of that stuff. For sure. Yeah. So congratulations to him too. So I guess if you got any closing comments for our listeners as we wrap up here, any warnings, any issues or statements of direction? Keep your hat on.
Tin foil will not help you. And it's not made out of tin anymore anyway. In fact, I don't know when it was made out of tin because it was aluminum foil when I was a kid. So, and aluminum foil, well, it will protect you from the heebie-jeebies, but it won't protect you from the aliens or a Russian nuclear attack, which could happen at any moment, except they can count just like we can count. And they know number of missiles. It's not a likely thing. And you want a closing comment? Glory to Ukraine. I mean that sincerely.
Yeah. Great. Well, excellent. I mean, that was so much stuff in there, and thanks so much for coming on. We deeply, deeply appreciate it.
Yeah.
No, let me know when it's aired, and I'll let my thousands of fans.
Of course, your Illuminati handlers as well.
Well, they have to approve.
They're already in the room.
You'll find that your recording has mysteriously been erased. And instead, it's a bunch of Max Fleischer cartoons from the 1930s, black and white. No Betty Boop, though.
No Betty Boop. Cool. Yeah, we will definitely be in touch soon, and thanks again for coming on.
Oh, you guys ask the right questions. You really do, and that's not always the case. So thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm available if you need somebody in September or something. Here I am.
Thanks again, and thanks as always for listening.